Right then, let's get this moving, shall we? I found a 2-day window of opportunity to complete Alan's first leg up the coast. Whilst this will mean the Dauntless Yard near the Thames Estuary will no longer be home, I do plan to keep a presence at the yard for build projects and keeping a lid on the sheer quantity of equipment to store. Alan was well stocked as a workshop for much of the last few years. This is what I hope to achieve for this leg. Around 100 miles in total, split with an overnight anchorage and getting into a Lowestoft marina on the Suffolk coast early enough to catch a train home to London. Alanson, the inflatable launch, is now full of air and self-importance, and I needed to check all was mechanically well on board too. We're about to start Alan up for, well, the first time of the grand voyage. It's quite exciting. Good start. And that the seat pads were positioned for me to see what's what from up on high. Inside, we have a hybrid setup at the moment. Most workshop gear is gone, save for 3 boxes of tools and items to be installed or improved en route. So, still quite full. And yes, that is a low wattage AC unit stowed there for later use. Spinning up the engine to make sure that everyone's happy before we get going. I think we have success. There's no... Just in time to greet our companion for this leg. Perfect timing. Hello, Dick. The true expert is on the water. The upper deck no longer serves as storage and will be home only to strap down fenders when not in use. We need a clear line of sight from the driving position, both through the window out to sea and also down within the boat in case of drama. Setting off wasn't a moment of as much grandeur or note as you'd have thought. There was water in the creek, which helped. We had an outside pontoon slot, so could simply cast off and steer out into the channel. A few waves from people on board their much more salubrious boats, plus others on the bank, and soon the yard was behind us. The sailing club passed by next, an interesting neighbour to the yard, but unlikely to have been quite so forgiving to the months and months of noisy, messy renovation work. The elevated position for the helm's seat is something of a mixed bag. You get good visibility and awareness in some senses, but a disconnect, particularly to the bow and behind you. A to-be-installed monitor to connect to the all-round cameras will be a welcome addition once I've solved the wiring conundrum. The creek widens a little, but there are a number of dramatic but well-marked twists and turns you need to make in order to not run aground. Only at the high water itself, in a shallow draft boat, might you be lucky enough to scoot over the top and avoid embarrassment. Vision, in 3 directions at least, is better if you stick your head out the top hatch, but that can't form a habit, as weather will rarely be as pleasant as it is now. I handed over the reins and headed up top to neaten out the fenders. I have a trio of original inflatable cylindrical ones, but also 3 new flat foam pad fenders that apparently stay put rather better and do not deflate. Does anyone have prolonged experience with these? Before long, the nature of the water shifted. It's something pretty normal, I understand, in the Thames Estuary when there's even a moderate wind, as the entire zone is markedly and consistently shallow. This makes it ideal for building forts, wind farms and so on, but Alan and I don't want a fort, nor a wind farm. Aside from the deep dredge shipping channels, sandbanks are rarely deeper down than a few feet, especially at low tide, and this means lots of little waves with short periods. Along with Alan's hull being in shallow draft mode, and without proper offshore bilge keels fitted yet, it was quite rolly. But, well over a metric ton heavier than the last time we took Alan on the water, both of us noted how much better and more planted and sure-footed Alan seemed, no longer bobbing around like a cork. We were side on to the waves, so the roll was as bad as it was going to get, but apparently taking a 2 sides of the triangle deviation would have wasted a lot of distance and time, if merely for the sake of comfort. This is the first time I've also had to really think about keeping the sea on the correct side of the hatches. On pleasant days, having 1 or more hatches open gives you A, a breeze, and B, good visibility of what's around Alan, but it risks you getting a face full of seawater when the wave and Alan's momentary angle position conspire against us. Again, we need to get comfortable safely navigating Alan with all the hatches closed. But the open hatch did once again offer an opportunity to greet one of Alan's many cousins aboard this tanker, heading towards the port of London. Unusually it was a davit-lowered model like Alan, unlike the freefall versions these ships more often have. The bumpy sea continued. Not in any way rough or dangerous, but just bumpy. And whilst taking my turn standing there holding the hatch with the wind from behind trying to close it, we're going to have to come up with a better restraint system for the hatches. They're flapping about a bit in the wind. And certainly not staring at the horizon by way of self-preservation, I found something else for the to-do list. Now we were rounding a few more buoys, and this allowed us a roughly 60-degree change in heading. The waves were now not only at a far less galling angle, but the water was becoming deeper, and so the waves smoothed out noticeably. Time to open the taps a little on Alan's throttle and get us up to our cruising speed of around 6 or 7 knots, plus or minus the currents. It was at this point that my plans for 2 days of travel, anchoring in protected waters and with time to take in our surroundings a little and maybe fly the drone, started to fall off the schedule, increasingly confusingly. We're making very good progress, and we're just about to go past one of the medium-sized wind farms. There's an absolutely huge one over there, apparently well over 200 turbines. And we've now got the tide quite strongly heading out, and that's right on our port side. So I'm now trying to counteract that so we're not blown too far off our course. We're making really good time. I think we should be able to get into Walton-on-the-Nae, possibly even about an hour earlier than I anticipated. Well, I thought I'd come up here for a little bit of peace and quiet whilst helming with my feet, which is a technique which I perfected since the early sea trials days. And I thought what I would actually quickly do is say a thank you to our Wonderment members, Martin, and we have Peter, who I always pronounce the name wrong of, and he will no doubt correct me in the email, and who is our fourth? Oh, of course, our original, Paul, the first Wonderment member. So thank you for being an extra special supporter of Alan and Alan's antics. It was at this point that my plan for 2 full days of travel, anchoring in protected waters and with time to take in our surroundings a little, started to fall off the schedule somewhat, and increasingly confusing. More buoys passed by, and I mused ideas to get the names of my YouTube channel Wonderment members mounted upon them, but then realised that would probably break half a dozen maritime laws. I did find some time when I wasn't on my shift at the helm to do a few chores, and ready Alan for the increasing number of changes and enhancements due as we go along. Those keener on tinkering episodes and less on the travels will rejoice that I will intersperse more conversion and upgrade episodes into these journey episodes. First, some foam padding on these racking beams to allow us to use the sleeping platform. Second, these new heavy-duty grab handles need to replace the under-spec'd ones. I also checked in on the engine. Beyond the carbon fibre top panels, I've yet to soundproof with TechSound matting. Everything seemed okay in there, and all the appropriate rotating components were doing just that, but the air temperature seemed high. The air intake is now drawn from fresh cabin air via a silenced duct on the cowling, meaning air is no longer dragged in from the bay itself. The air is not being renewed. This will need the completion of an extraction duct I experimented with over a year ago. The exhaust wasn't producing any smoke, but it's inevitable, I suppose, that a diesel exhaust outlet won't leave a bright orange paint job totally unmarked. It adds character, or at least that's what I told Alan. Well, we've just cleared one of the sandbanks, which was slightly nerve-wracking because it's getting towards low tide. But no, that's a big success, and it's turning into really quite a pleasant evening. Heading now towards the Naze Tower, which is the big landmark ahead of us, and hopefully it means that we can then get to Walton-on-the-Nae, which is where we're going to find somewhere to anchor for evening number 1 of Alan's grand adventure. All of the chop from earlier has really calmed down. This is when the understanding from earlier that we were to spread the journey across 2 days really ended up eroded back to something altogether different. Instead, I felt a new pressure to complete the 100 miles in around a 20 to 22 hour push, with near to no sleep, and without heading west to anchor in a sheltered area. I felt in no position to refuse, so instead of heading into the backwaters, we ended up finding a place just offshore, rather close to the shipping lanes heading in and out of the port of Harwich. Having checked the anchor was still there, most certainly a plus in the event that you wish to anchor, I approached the evening from a positive perspective. Tell you what, the conditions have really settled down. This is going to be a gorgeous evening. It'll be nice for our first anchorage because obviously it might be a little bit rusty on the old skills, so not doing it in a force 20 gale will be quite nice. Anyway, enjoy the sunset. The metal structure to fit over the generator is nearing completion, but it's still fine to use the hatch without it. Below the genset mount is just enough space for 2 buckets, one with the anchor rope and the other the chain, shackled together, of course. The anchor lives outside, and until the chain conduit and through hole goes in, the parts for which I've now ordered, it needs to go through and out the hatch, and then shackle onto the anchor, after which the safety retention clip can be removed. Picking a location to stop will be down to depth, since the sea all around was featureless as we motored a few hundred metres off the shoreline. Cool, so I think what we'll do is we'll trust this will be a good spot and give it a go, shall we? We stopped and I dropped the anchor, feeding down after it the calculated length of rope once the chain was fully deployed on the sandy seabed. The rope was tied off and we were anchored, but we wanted to try and stabilise Alan's movement depending on the wind and tide. So we're making a makeshift drogue, are we?
We are, yes. Back it, not chuck it. This is a drogue to try and pull the Alan rearwards.
I do have a proper sea anchor, but we thought we'd go for a slightly cheaper option.
We're actually anchored off Walton-on-the-Nae. We're rolling about a bit. I'm hoping that the weather will calm. If it doesn't, we may have to shift. Or be sick or whatever. Present time, this slam shut.
Yeah. Apparently the sea anchor would be overkill, but a bucket would take its place, cast off the stern to catch the tide. Just as well I bolted another post onto the stern. So many things to tie on. And if any of you were wondering why so many of the preceding clips seem to show an approaching sunset constantly just above the horizon, but seemingly going on forever, this was the day before the summer solstice, so the sun spent a long time thinking about setting, but eventually it did. We had a quick meal, and then with a plan presented as a 2 o'clock in the morning start after fewer than 3 hours sleep, I negotiated 1 more hour, and then did the 10 minutes or so of admin we needed before trying to rest. I'm quite happy with my white light on the mast, which doubles up, first of all as an all-round white light for navigation, but also as an anchor light. There it is. We could possibly have picked a slightly less rocky place to anchor, so hello to our first anchorage place, and you can see we have an anchor light. This did not go well. The wash from ships, plus a rising breeze, plus whatever the tides were up to, went from gently rocking Alan to rolling him 40 degrees to each side. I got absolutely zero sleep, and so cancelled my extra hour of sleep extension, and we set to getting ready for the second part of the leg at about 2 in the morning. You can witness my delight at the scenario here.
Right, we have ourselves a delightful 2:30 in the morning, and we're going to now sort ourselves out and then get the anchor up. I'm definitely a morning person.
Getting the anchor up was quite fiddly, as although the rope drew up with real ease, even without needing to run Alan's engine to motor towards the anchor a little, the shackle linking the rope to chain was only just smaller than the bow roller. Under tension, it took a few tries to get it to pass over and allow me to lift the chain and the anchor, but I managed it and we eventually used the engine a little to lessen the pull. Dick had slept pretty much solidly from heads down to heads up, so he took the helm for the first stint, and I tried to get at least some rest for an hour or two after my duty in searching for lobster pots was complete, and attempts to keep my eyes open failed despite the fascinations with the busy shipping traffic heading into Harwich. We motored north, with a mixture of pace dependent on how the tides were behaving. For one section, Alan maintained a constant speed over ground of over 8 knots, yet at other points managed barely 4. We passed Southwold, having glimpsed back at the nuclear plant at Sizewell B. It was time to start planning our approach to Lowestoft, our destination. There are, as is typical along this coastline, sandbars and other obstacles to avoid, and whilst Lowestoft isn't a vast port, it does have a fairly regular throughput of commercial shipping. That meant we didn't want to embarrass ourselves as we entered the channel and approached the outer harbour. Lowestoft is also famous for being the hometown of the understated Baroque tribute orchestra, The Darkness. Well, the tides are quite significantly against us, pushing us back away from our destination, but Alan is unflagged, he's tenacious, and he motors onwards. Most of the outer harbour and docks are commercial or for the fishing fleet, and only the yacht club has berths in the area nearest the sea. We'd need to pass under a bridge to get to our marina, and we were a metre too tall. Luckily, the bridge does lift, but only on a schedule, and you need to book in a slot with the harbour master. Lowestoft hove into view, and we passed a few of the very sparse numbers of small pleasure boats out on the water this early in the summer. I spoke to the harbour dudes and booked us in for the pre-midday bridge lift. Just currently having a chat with the harbour control, the TS, because they've got the large ship coming in behind us, and we want to make sure that we can go through the bridge at the right time, because there are certain times when they lift the bridge. I noticed a problem with my mounted VHF unit installation. It passed our radio check with Dover Coast Guard the day before with flying colours, and I could hear the harbour master fine with these headphones I've adapted to run from the radio's mono speaker output. But they couldn't hear my broadcasts, and when listening to other boats speaking to the harbour master, I couldn't hear the boats very clearly. So my VHF isn't performing except with high power shore stations. Any ideas? Luckily, I could listen using the headphones and transmit using my handheld. The instructions from the very friendly harbour boss were thankfully clear: to pull into the side harbour and moor to the waiting pontoon, and then hang on until our bridge opening time was nigh. This would give the large ship following us an opportunity to get through in a special commercial-only bridge lift. We're just on the waiting pontoon because at some point they've got to go and lift the bridge, and if we're going to go underneath the bridge, it needs to be raised because it's only about 2.5 metres high, and obviously Alan is significantly taller than 3.5 metres, so we have to wait. Apparently there's a large ship coming in first, and we need to let them go through into the commercial dock before we can head through into the main area where all the marinas are. Alan had taken the journey in his stride, reliable and doing as well as he could, or been designed and restored to achieve. I checked beneath the surface and everything appeared to still be there. The new freshwater cooling circuit had done its job, and I didn't notice any coolant leaks. I did notice a light film of oil in parts of the engine bay though. I've consulted those in the know, and they do not suspect a substantial dangerous oil mist, but I should investigate the source before we do another significant leg, let alone go offshore. Anyhow, the large ship passed through, and some short while later, after the car traffic had their irate frustration relieved for a while with the bridge lowered, we got the go-ahead. We peeled in behind a small fishing vessel and slowly motored through. It was only a 15-minute or so journey up the river towards the marina, but that was time to pretty much turn every head on the decks of the cargo and fishing fleet and border force ship lining the docks. I had asked the Kai Marina staff at the Lowestoft Beacon Marina, I think previously called the Haven Marina, if we could have a visitor mooring slot that wasn't too hard to manoeuvre into, given that Alan's deck is tricky to jump ashore from with lines, and we lack bow thrusters. And they did a sterling job. An area of pontoon without lots of boats either side, and with easy access from the main channel. Easy to tie up, say hello, sign in, and done. So given the delay from the original schedule both 2 and then 1 week ago, I'm now entering into a fortnight with some work commitments, but I do also need a few days to sort out this VHF and engine oil issue, so I'll keep on working, filming, posting, and causing a general nuisance of myself. Alan's journey north, leg 1, Benfleet to Lowestoft, complete. Bye.